how would we represent that chase feeling in an RPG? Because obviously, I don't think eating dots on a map is going to be very interesting. This is Ryan from the editing booth. Just wanted to let you know at the top of the episode, this is actually part 2 of our episode on mechanics. We ended up talking so long that we didn't want to give you a 2-hour episode. We broke it up into 2 parts. So this is the second part. If you haven't listened to the first one, I suggest to go do that. But we kind of come in here and start talking about specific mechanics that we use in our RPGs and why we use them and how that enhances our games. So that's where we'll kind of pick up the conversation here. I hope you enjoy the episode, and the encounter at the end was actually quite interesting. I'm going to mention some just cool mechanics, and feel free to chime in here with other things. So these are big mechanics that you steal from other games. I'm going to mention some small mechanics, which I've mentioned before. I think all of these before at one point or another, but these are ones that I use quite often for particular encounters, depending on the feeling that I am trying to get. So one is the Greyhawk. Well, this comes, let me also preface with this. Of all the games that I play, the one that I have to add the most mechanics to make it feel the way that I want it to feel is Dungeons and Dragons. So they're going to be kind of D&D centric. I find that and this could just be me, but I find that when I tend to pick another system, I find that with groups, we'll kind of default to D&D sometimes. And so then I have to do a lot of like adding things in to get this mechanic or adding things in to get this feeling. Whereas I feel like typically when I choose Genesis, like I know the experience I'm getting and we chose that for a reason. Even Savage Worlds, which is still pretty like focused, I feel like, okay, we knew what we were getting into. We wanted it to be very, pulp. That's what we wanted. And then especially if I'm playing an indie game, if I decide to play it, which I haven't, but one that I need to play is Slayer, or if I'm playing Wuda or Lumen or any of these other like smaller games, I've chosen that game because it has the mechanics that I want for the story I'm going to tell. So this little bit is, I guess, a little more, I just want to preface it with, I'm going to talk about these and how I apply it to my game, and they're all going to go back to D&D. Not necessarily because I think D&D is a better game, but it's the one that tends to need the most work in this regard, in my experience. You guys might have a different experience. But so one is the Greyhawk Initiative, which is actually from Wizards of the Coast. It was a Unearthed Arcana that they published. And essentially what that does is you change initiative every round. You have to declare your actions, and depending on your actions, you get different initiative dice. The longer an action takes, the bigger die size you get. Your dexterity is actually you subtract instead of add, and you're going for the lowest number. Lowest number goes first. I don't use this regularly because, well, for a few reasons, but the time that I do use this is when I do really want things to be uncertain. If my group has started a combat and they're trying to capture someone, this initiative system is great because the initiative changes every single round. The players cannot be like, oh, well, I'll do this thing because you're going to get to go next, and then you'll capture him. Again, small side tangent. I don't discourage. If your system has that going on, then of course your players are going to do that. They want to be good at the game, and that's what the game says is going to happen. So this prevents that because for 2 reasons. One, because you did that, because it's changing, but also because you have to declare what you're going to do. If you don't say I'm going to move when I roll initiative, then you don't get to move. End of story. What was the other bit? So I'll use it for that, where I want that uncertainty. Otherwise, I tend to use the regular initiative. Another one I use, which I know I've talked about, is a timer die. I usually have environmental things going on. And I'll use like a D4 or a D6, and I roll it, and I say, hey, in 3 rounds, something is going to happen. You don't know what it is yet, but your hero instincts are saying, in 3 rounds, something is going to happen. Then, of course, you tick down, everybody takes a turn, 3, 2, 1, boom, the thing happens. And often it's repeating, so it makes turns matter. I'll use it in a whole dungeon. Like there's, I don't know, tentacles coming out of the wall or black slime dripping around that injures you and tries to capture you, and it makes things move forward. So that one's really great. Another one that I've used that I know your guys' home group is still in love with is a spawning mechanic. Every turn I'll roll, and this is in a ton of board games, this is in video games, but like every turn I roll, say, a D4 to see where enemies spawn, and I'll roll 2D6, and I'll have a bunch of like little minions, 1 HP, 2 HP, 5 HP minions that are coming out, I think is what they were called in 4th edition, and they just like boom appear, and then you have to deal with 6 new 1 HP spiders that explode if they get too close to you. Whatever else it might be. But it's a great way to just give that heroic feeling of like, yes, we are heroes and we are taking everything out, right? It's not a monster with 75 HP where you're like, oh God, I swing my sword at it again. Mm-hmm. You are wrecking face, but also they just keep coming. And then partial success, which we already talked about. I try to use that quite often because I think partial successes and giving players, I think we've referred to them before as like those devil's deals or whatever. Like, okay, you can do it, but you can break the mechanics of the game. I did this one. So in my current D&D campaign, a very important NPC, the mentor of the wizard, was captured by an organization that wants to stop wizards. And my wizard wanted to break the normal rules of spellcasting. He wanted to use 2 spells in a turn, right? And I said, okay, you can do that, but here's what's going to happen if you do it. This is your consequence, which is a narrative consequence. In this case, he has to tap into bad magic, which like hurts him, and it's a long story to get into, but it was a negative thing. And in the end, I was like, you can break D&D. You don't have to follow D&D rules, but bad things are going to happen to you. What do you want? And in the end, he was like, no, I'm not going to do that. But those kinds of things can be very, very helpful. That partial success, or that, here we can tweak the rules, but here's your consequence. Do you guys have any things that you find that you use often, cool mechanics that you really like in your game?
Coming back to where I started, when you tell me making a roll and give me a good reason why you should get an extra die or an advantage on it, and it makes sense for the story, you have that. I'm not saying it's not written in the rules or anything like that. If you give me a narrative reason that works with the story, I'm more than happy to give you an extra die or some bonus or an advantage in D&D, because you take part in the story, and that's what it's about. It's not about rolling the dice. It's about telling the story. And if you are immersed and give me a good reason, yeah, I'm all for it. Another thing that I think might be interesting to introduce, I haven't done it out of the system, but Savage World has exploding dice. And that makes Savage World very unique when it comes to it. It's like you try to fight, you miss, and then your dice explode and everything is just one big thing. I don't think a D20 system works with that very well because the odds are just too low. In a D6 system, it works really well.
It's the sword of exploding dice. 2d6 damage or 3d6 or whatever, every 6 explodes on damage. There you go. There's your...
That's true.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Savage sword.
Mm-hmm.
Savage sword. Yeah. So this is maybe item. Something... Yeah, this is something that I think would be fun to play. I know that some system, for example, the Dark Eye, when you roll a 1, it's a roll under system. So a critical success would be a 1 and a critical failure would be a 20. You roll that die again and reaffirm if it's really dead. So this is a system that goes a little bit careful with those criticals. This might be a mechanic that you could introduce when you really want to make sure that everything is a little bit more toned down, I guess. It works in the Dark Eye quite okay because each check you roll 3 d20s. So it's 3 times the rolling compared to D&D. And probably 3 times the fun.
Some have said that.
More dice is better.
More dice is more. Talking about more dice, maybe we should think about Shadowrun-sized dice pools just to make sure that we really, really get into the feeling of shaking 25 dice and just have that clunk on the table for effect. Not always, but for effect sometimes. Just say, hey, you did something really cool. Take 5 additional dice and just roll them and see what happens. I think that would be fun.
In speaking to Shadowrun, something that I do actually use, which I found out, I don't know if it's originally, but the most popular game that this is a mechanic of it is in Shadowrun, all checks are always a combination of a trait, and well, not all, but the most normal checks are usually a combination of a trait and a skill or of 2 skills. So you are combining, and they use a dice pool system, like you said. But one of the coolest things that I find that one thing that I find that can be really freeing in a system in D&D, and this is something I actually use in Savage Worlds too, is uncoupling skills from traits. So if you have firearms, for example, in Genesis, but you want to know who made this gun, I wouldn't make you have a separate intelligence or knowledge firearms. I would say, okay, use your intelligence and firearms, because chances are if you shoot guns a lot, you know a lot about them. Like, I mean, of course, there's always exceptions to the rule, but you know, the vast majority of people who are good at something are also like genuinely interested in the thing, right? If you're an acrobat, you probably also know of other famous acrobats, and you could tell me about how acrobats work or how certain things, you know, happen based on your knowledge, not only do sick flips. So doing that, I think, is another cool mechanic.
It's the idea that is done a little bit in D&D, particularly with the barbarian. I think they are allowed to use strength for intimidation checks instead of charisma or whatever it is, something like that. But that I really like that idea.
Actually, I'm gonna do the whole rule lawyer spiel thingy. In D&D, it actually is somewhere in the book that they say, hey, if it makes sense that you use a different stat for a skill, go for it. And I think the example is swimming. If you swim for a really, really long time, you use Constitution instead of Strength, I think, for your athletics check, because you've got to make sure if you have the stamina, not just the muscle power. And I think it makes a lot of sense to take those skills not as, oh, but athletics is always strength or whatever. So mix it up a little bit. That will help your story. And that goes again with, if it makes sense, go for it.
I'm almost certain it's an optional rule, except for tool proficiency. So that's why I say I added it. You're right. It is in the core book, but I think it was other places first, and I use it across other systems.
Also, I think the reason D&D Fireball is so fun, it is because of the amount of dice that you get to roll. It's just simple as that. More dice is better.
If you play Shadowrun, rolling a fireball, rolling 86 that's what you roll when you're bad at something.
Yeah.
This is true.
But hey, I've gotten into wargaming, and I'll tell you, a huge appeal of it is I get to roll 40 dice at a time. It's amazing.
See, I was going to go the other direction. Complete, is that I've played Monty Cook's Numenera, where the DM doesn't have to roll anything ever, pretty much. And I kind of like that. A lot of the things have fixed values, like heavy weapons, no matter what it is, has a fixed value. So how you describe it, how the player describes it, or how the GM describes it, is all flavor. The actual mechanical damage that it does is all the same. And the way the system works that I really like, and I don't know how you could apply this to D&D because it's just so different, is that there are like levels. For example, a level 4 monster, you already know there's a target number, and so the level 4 monster can never roll above or never attack above a certain number. So if the player character has armor and other defenses that are more than that number, then the monster will always miss them.
So in the Monty Cook game, I believe, and if they don't, basically the player rolls. I mean, you could port that into D&D.
Yeah, the player rolls everything. Like the GM doesn't roll, hardly ever, very, very rarely. Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, when the monster takes the offensive, if it's not clear whether or not the monster will attack, the player rolls a dodge, right?
The player has a defense roll. The player always has a defense roll. Yeah. So, but my point about the way the mechanics of the game works is, particularly for NPCs and for monsters, there's a threshold that they have. So if a monster is significantly lower than a player character, the monster is always going to miss. The player doesn't know this. The player still rolls their defense roll. The GM knows this.
Sure. My point is, so if you looked at the monsters, so like if you open the D&D book, right, and you looked at so basically you invert AC. So an 18 is a 2, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thaco!
And you subtract. Well, you could add 2, but it would be weird that the player would be rolling high, right? So if you just invert it, you say, okay, you have an AC of 18. Now your AC is 2. The monster has a +4. Well, that's a -4.
Mm-hmm.
You roll a dodge roll.
Mm-hmm.
If you get under 2, if you get 2 or less, then you get hit. It's mathematically the same thing.
Yeah.
So you could port it over really easy.
I couldn't. I drink too much when I GM, but other people could port it over really easy.
Keeping with the theme of not rolling dice, so going away from the huge dice pools that are great to not rolling dice at all, powered by the
apocalypse.
Powered by the apocalypse has moves, and moves just work. So you don't roll anything. You just say, I'm going to use that move. There might be something attached to it, a prerequisite that you are doing this move, but that's basically a mechanic that speeds up the game, takes out that rolling and that often unnecessary, oh, do I really be able to do that? I should be because I'm a specialist in that field, so why am I rolling? That type of thing is taken out with moves. Would it make sense in a D&D game? I'm not sure. I don't think it mixes well with a D&D game on that level. It would definitely fit easier in other games. I think D&D is just a little bit too structured for something like that, but that might just be my feeling of it. But I think moves is a mechanic of a game that definitely has its merits.
I'm going to level with you guys. I hate not rolling dice.
As a player, I want to roll dice. As a GM, I got other shit I want to do.
No. As a GM, I want to roll dice too. I want to have fun. Now, that being said, I totally get the appeal. Like, there's a part of me, there's a logical part of me that's like, no, that's really good because it's the players, now the players feel more like whatever they do is their own fault and it's not me rolling hot, and I get it. But then I sit at the table and I run the game and I'm like, I didn't get to roll dice all night. Why did I even go? That was a joke. But
was it? Because I have played Gumshoe, which is a brilliant system, but it's not designed to roll dice.
No, as a player, if I don't roll dice, I get real cranky. But even as a GM, if I don't roll dice, but that's me. These are RPGs you can steal ideas from, and these are ones that are already made. But I actually want to get into a little bit about how we can take, like, it's not only role-playing games that you can steal mechanics from. So a few places where I will, so we've talked a lot about other RPGs and how you can strip mechanics from them. Another great place to steal mechanics from is our video games. I mean, some of the original video games were just trying to emulate, our original role-playing video games were trying to emulate D&D, and they actually used a lot of the same mechanics. Since then, computer systems, what they can do, have evolved, and video games have become their own genre, but it's very easy to go in and borrow mechanics from RPGs. Whether it's the feeling of a particular level or battle, or whether it's just a particularly clever mechanic in a game that you could see would port to a role-playing game very cool in a very interesting way. I mean, do it. I wrote an encounter for the site based on a video game adaptation of the Two Towers movie for PlayStation or PlayStation 2. I can't remember. Obviously called The Two Towers. Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. But in the Battle of Helm's Deep, the fight was broken into a few different phases. And one of the phases was the defending the wall phase. And in the game, you played either, you played one of the three fighter fellowship people. So you're either Gimli, Legolas, or Aragorn. And part of it was running along the wall, and you'd have orcs coming up the wall. You needed to keep the number of orcs down or you would lose, and you also needed to kick down the ladders that they were putting up to keep too many from overrunning it. And there was a lot of other things about, combos and button pushes, but that little bit right there, like having a random ladder spawn on a wall and having to respond to that ports super easy into a role-playing game and really gives you that over-the-top action feel. And easy. Roll a d6 for one of the 6 places the ladder could spawn this turn, ladder comes up there. If there's a ladder up from last turn, d6 orcs spawn in that area or whatever your enemy is, and you just have to make a skill check to knock that ladder over. You have to be at the spot or be away and figure out a way to make a skill check to, keep the ladder from going. And that's easy. And you will get that like cinematic war combat feel if you describe it right. Have you guys ever borrowed anything from video games?
I just want to, nothing I've borrowed myself, but I just wanted to point out that the use of skill trees in Genesis is that's really commonplace in video games, and I don't know if that's something they purposefully took from video games, but that is, I mean, so many modern games have skill trees, so I just wanted to point that out because that seems to be a direct influence.
I haven't borrowed anything from video games, but I've borrowed actually something from board games. I created a game called Five Fists. The idea was it was part of a game jam on itch. The idea was to create games that could fit on a business card. So I created a business card and I said, hey, how about I create 5 business cards with 5 different characters? The game mechanic is a coin flip. If you have an advantage or are really good at something, you get to flip 2 coins. You need 1 success. So heads or tail, you assign it to it. Then I said, hey, now I have those cards. How about I take some more cards? And I created a map with 5 rooms. And those 5 rooms were, again, business card-sized cards. When you enter a room, you would turn it over. You would see the room, and each room had an extra card with instructions. So using those cards and a map made from cards basically eliminated the GM out of the game. That was not the intent in the beginning. It just happened. And at some point I was like, oh, board games are basically games that you play without a GM because you have cards. Little nod to Legends of Andor. It's a fantasy game where you play a dwarf, a wizard, a fighter, or an elf. They have all the skills that you know from role-playing games. It has a story, and the story moves forward based on what happens, and what happens is outlined with cards. So this was part of the inspiration that I took from it. So yeah, cards could replace a GM, or cards could help you generate a random map. Again, Peach Garden Games Cat created a system, Carta, and as the name says, you use cards. You use a standard poker deck, and you would lay out a grid out of those cards, and based on you would explore the map. That grid is your map, and based on where you are, something happens in that room based on what the card is. So you could take that kind of mechanic to randomize a map. For example, that would be something when you say, hey, let's try to have a different feeling for a game. You would have to improvise maybe a little bit more when you play a role-playing game in a traditional setting, and the GM says, how about we try it out with cards? But it would be a mechanic that would change something, be perfectly fine to use in a group game. The Carta game is a solo game. But I think it would work in a group game as well.
Yeah, I mean, board games are another great place for inspiration because they're a game. They contain a lot of mechanics, and often, while many board games, I guess this is getting less and less true, but while many board games are competitive, so there are some differences there, there's usually little bits of information or little bits of the way that the game works that you can use in your role-playing game. There's a board game called Zombicide, which is essentially you play heroes who eviscerate hordes of zombies and try to survive. There are 2 cool things about that game. One, the enemies all have very programmed actions, so players get to know what they do right off the bat, and you can plan and make decisions that way. The other thing is the enemies being clearly indicated, and each enemy having a different specific ability. And I know that's a fairly general mechanic, but that is a great mechanic to put in your role-playing game. Back to the famous spider game. The spider is red. Oh, the red spider explodes. The spider is blue. Oh, it'll shock you if it gets close to you, and you will convulse for a minute. Having those signals to players, those very clear signals, lets players make tactical decisions and gives you that kind of vibe of like, okay, like I can make a choice here because I have the information. Have you borrowed mechanics from board games before, Kade?
I don't think so. I'm not a big video game guy, so I haven't probably. Most of the video games I've played are just emulating D&D, probably, and stealing those things. Board games, well, I mean, this is similar to what you've mentioned about a timer die or a clock mechanic, but the Doom. I don't know if they call it a clock or a marker or whatever in the Arkham Horror game.
Yeah.
I've used something similar in games, but I don't know if I got the idea from a board game or if I got the idea from an RPG, but just some sort of counter that the players are aware of. That's the difference. It's not a counter that the GM's keeping secret. It's a counter that's on the table that the players are aware of. I've used that mechanic a few times. I don't think there's anything else that I've done that I may have subconsciously stolen or used.
So before we get into creating an encounter for this episode, one thing I do want to caution against, because I've definitely fallen into this trap, is it is super fun to hack your game. It is super worth hacking your game and figuring out what to do with it. Before you bring ideas to a game that you're currently playing, one thing I would think about before you start tacking on rules is, what is it that you're going for? What do you think it will add to the game? And like, why are you doing it? It's okay to experiment and go wild, especially if you're going to do like a one shot, you're going to do something small. But if you're running an ongoing campaign, something to think about is, how does adding this change the feeling of the game? Not that you can't talk to your players and remove the ability to do it later, but sometimes there becomes so many options that things don't get really used. I know in my first D&D game, I was like, oh, I want to add some crafting into D&D because crafting is so cool. I want players to be able to make their own weapons and enchant stuff and da-da-da. And we did it. We did it for a little while. I built a system around it that was fairly simple, but it was just another thing to keep up with. And so it kind of fizzled away, and not because the players didn't like it or weren't interested, but it wasn't really a core part of the story and it wasn't pushing things forward. And I think it's really easy to bloat up rules like that, like create a situation for everything, whether you're designing a game or you're just running it. Add in these little bits. I love the timer dice. I love, spawning. I love the Merle's initiative. I love all of those things. If I'm using more than one of those things in an encounter, you can bet I have a reason. There's something that I'm going after to get that feeling. So just keep that in mind as you add and change things. What is it you're going to get out of this? What is this going to add? Not that you shouldn't experiment or shouldn't try things, but just, if you come in with, okay, we have 7 new rules for today's session, they might end up going by the wayside, or people might not jump into it. Whereas if you go, okay, we're going to do this thing today, we're going to try this out and see how it goes. Or, this is why I'm doing it. And be transparent with your players. Don't make it a secret as to why you're using this mechanic.
I think you mentioned something really important there. Try it out in one-shots. That's something where you don't jeopardize ruining a campaign. The other thing is, and I think that you did that subconsciously, was you went from talking about game to encounter. Because I think that's what it really should be. I wouldn't necessarily, in a game that is completely fleshed out, when we talk about the big titles, they're often in their 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th edition. There's a reason those games are a long time around. They are play tested. They are usually well-rounded. They usually do what they want to do, not necessarily what the players want, but what the game was designed for. They do that pretty well. If you add stuff in there for an encounter to make this one encounter stand out, I think that's a clever idea. Adding something just because I like the mechanic will change the overall feel of the game, and that might take something away from how the game was designed. I mean, that's why people always come back to maybe you shouldn't homebrew your D&D. Maybe you should pick up a different system, because by the time you're done homebrewing D&D, you basically just created a different game. So why not take another system? I think doing something for a single encounter to really drive home that this is something unique right now, I think that's a really good idea.
And remember, if you like crafting, I mean, the Dark Eye exists.
Yeah.
Another one that I need to play. I'm not sure how much I'm going to love it, but I need to play it.
You know, no. So I rag on the Dark Eye, but I really enjoyed playing it. It's just, this is something goes directly towards our conversation. If you've only played D&D, or if you've only played more of a beer and chips kind of game, the Dark Eye is a different mindset. The mechanics are designed to make you plan and consider and prepare. And this is a mechanical thing. This is not a setting thing, or not. It's the mechanics are designed to make the player pause and prepare before they attack, or consider maybe we shouldn't attack. And it's just that I rag on it, but I quite enjoyed it but it's a different mindset.
Very much, very much. You see this specifically when it comes to magic. In D&D, you cast a spell and it goes off. Bam. In the Dark Eye, it might take 2 turns before that spell actually is cast. So you really need to prepare. What can I do? You go into that room with your spell basically ready to take off, because you scouted out that room. You know what's in there. You don't just walk in as what you could do in D&D. You could just walk in, because it doesn't really change that much. In the Dark Eye, it changes a lot. So yeah, that's a mechanic that is interesting, and players can learn a lot from trying that system out and bringing that mindset into a different game.
Absolutely. Playing other games and reading them expands the way that you think about games, for sure. So for our encounter this time, we decided, in order to focus on mechanics, we were going to convert an old video game into an RPG encounter in a tabletop RPG game. We shared a few different ideas. We were thinking about maybe Joust or Space Invader, and Kade brought up the idea of Pac-Man. So what we're going to do is we're going to think about Pac-Man, the mechanics of Pac-Man, what makes Pac-Man feel like Pac-Man, and decide how we could apply that to a tabletop RPG in an encounter situation. So in this one, we're going to start with mechanics, even though we usually start with goals and all of those other things, but kind of dissect Pac-Man, what makes it interesting, and then figure out our encounter from there. So I hope you know what Pac-Man is. If you don't, Google it. It's a famous arcade game where you eat dots and get chased by ghosts. I think the thing that Pac-Man, what makes it interesting is kind of the planning, right? It's like a combination of planning and reaction to what's going on. What would you say the feeling of Pac-Man is, like, that you would be trying to get across?
It's not terror. It's the chase from both sides, because another thing we need to consider is mechanically the power-ups, where you eat the power-up and then you can eat the ghost.
Yeah, that swing and power, right?
That swing and power, but it's still the chase. The chase is both sides. So I think that's something to consider.
How would we represent that chase feeling in an RPG? Because obviously, I don't think eating dots on a map is going to be very interesting.
You don't think that's a tactical challenge of drawing out a map and saying, okay, guys?
Yeah, I'm going to move the ghosts one each time you guys move, each round. No. So what do you think we could do to represent the chase?
I have two options in my head. One option is the mechanic that Kate mentions, the clocks. We could use a clock mechanism for the ghosts to see how and when, or maybe even where they move. The other idea that I have, and that it's a little bit more based on Lumen that we talked about, is that the ghosts get to do something when the player would have a failure. But that would mean that we would have to have a mechanic where the players already have to do something in order to fail. So the ghosts are able to either move or maybe even move faster. That might be an opportunity to bring in or put in some moves that the ghosts would have the opportunity to do something. In the video game, when the ghost touches you, that's it. If I remember correctly, you lose a life, I think, whenever a ghost touches you. This could be represented by hit points, your individual lives, that you have a certain amount of hit points, and that the ghosts have a certain amount of possible attacks on you, which could be triggered by failures.
What if we did, I mean, we'd have to decide what it is they're doing, but what if we did something like this? I like the idea of it staying ghosts, not just because that way it's an homage to Pac-Man, but I think it's easy to make ghosts something that your players can't do anything about. So what if we said they're ghosts and they're chasing the players because they're in a place where the ghosts don't want them to be. We can decide all that later. The other interesting thing about the power-ups is that there is a limited number of them, and there are also specific places that they're located. But I think the more interesting part is that you can't just keep getting more. You have to complete your thing after. So they could have a little pearl that they can activate 4 times or whatever, and when it does, it glows with holy light, which sends the ghosts away again.
And you could make it where, you could make that also have a time mechanism. So you can use it 4 times and it stays on for this long. And you could even make it a series of skill checks where while it's on, you have to do this other thing while the ghosts are away. And then when it goes off, you got to run.
I like that idea. I was thinking a little bit about Pac-Man is set up in a 2D maze. Now, we want to have a little bit more. If we keep the idea of ghosts, my mind went to we have to investigate something in a haunted mansion. So we have not just a maze, but we have a 3-dimensional maze with different rooms and some hallways and all that stuff. So that would be
a candlestick in a kitchen.
A little bit like that. In Pac-Man, you have to clear the maze of all the dots that are laying around. This means you have to go to every place. If we say we need to find clues in the mansion, that means we have to do some exploration. That would be represented that we find clues for whatever happens in different rooms. Might have to do a little quiz here, might have to do some physical check to get to a different place over there. We might have to add in some skill checks to open a door. All of that with the mansion being haunted and ghosts flying around that might at any moment come down the hallway. I think that way we still have the representation of Pac-Man, put it into a different framework, but it's still, you still know where it comes from, I would say.
This was a cheesy idea at first, but now that I think about it, I like it. To drag in the board game situation, could literally have these different rooms in a mansion with different clues, and maybe there's 5 different ghosts, and you have to banish the one that did whatever atrocity happened in this mansion. And if you banish the wrong one, bad things happen. So it also gives you a choice. Like, okay, how long can I spend looking for clues to narrow it down?
What is your answer? What is your answer when the players ask, so are we just playing Clue?
No, we're playing Pac-Man Clue. It's got both.
What if it's the trope? The trope, you're looking for the object or the bones or whatever that is causing the ghost to manifest.
I think that would work too.
That's the trope from a lot of horror movies and things of that nature, that you have to destroy something or find something in order to stop the ghost from appearing.
I think that totally works too. You're looking to find the clues that tell you what that object is. So if we go back to our structure, the goal, our PC's goal, is to figure out what bad thing happened here and why the ghosts are still attached to the mortal realm, subsequently destroying that thing. What do we think that thing is, now that we have an idea of what's happening in this encounter?
Trope is bones, the bones of the body of the deceased, or an item that is meaningful to them.
Maybe we're picturing it a little bit differently. I'm picturing lots of ghosts, not just a ghost. So then I'm thinking it was some kind of atrocity.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So how would you? So what would be the multiple step? Well, it's more that what are the multiple steps that the PCs have to do to get rid of all these ghosts then? So maybe you're sanctifying the area.
Sure.
The reason you're running from room to room is you got to put holy water in all these places.
Do we want it to be a mystery? Because I did like the aspect of the mystery of like, okay, not only that gets into our modes, like then you have multiple modes. Not only am I making like all these skill checks, but like now I'm also piecing together a puzzle. I think we can get rid of that. I think it's okay to not have that. And it's okay to say just go to location A, drop holy water, go to location B, drop holy water, go to location C. But it also might be really interesting to be like, okay, go to location A, like what happened here? Go to location B, what happened here? And that's building towards giving us a story of what happened in this place, us having to do something about that. Or there could be a story there without us having to do anything or figure it out.
If we go investigation, I think one of the mechanics that might be interesting is we could go with levels of success, that we gain different knowledge based on how successful we do things. And based on that, we might be able to solve the mystery quicker or figure out our next location quicker. So I think this would be one of those times where those levels of successes would be really, really helpful and would add something very valuable to the game.
In this particular instance, I know I talked about failure and why it's so important, and I think there's still opportunity for failure, but I would take from Gumshoe in that if your players get to the relevant location with the relevant skill, they get the baseline necessary information about it. Now, you'd still do a roll, but they at least get, there was this is the minimum information that you need from this location.
Yeah.
Now, if it were just a mystery, I wouldn't do that, but given that we have Pac-Man also happening at the same time, I would include that.
Yeah, I agree. Anything you need to drive the situation forward. Yeah.
What's the mystery?
It's a chase.
Is it how they were killed? Is it what killed them?
Maybe with your initial idea that only one of them needs to be banished, maybe the other ghosts are harmful to the players because they're ghosts and not because they are evil or vicious or whatever, but one of them is. Maybe that one ghost is the one that did something bad, and if that ghost's remains are destroyed, they are finally at peace. If you destroy somebody else's remains, then everybody gets even more mad or something like that. But I'm not sure.
Yeah. I mean, you could even make it an ethical thing. You could make it like when you destroy it, like in order for these ghosts to get this place sanctified and make it safe again and to let these spirits go to peace, you need to figure out who the one was and you need to banish that one. You are destroying that ghost and their essence forever. If you destroy the wrong ghost, not only will they not be happy, but you have destroyed the essence of this innocent person.
Here's a thought. In the beginning of Pac-Man, the ghosts move kind of slow. The further you get, the ghosts start moving faster and faster. Maybe in the beginning of the situation, the ghosts are more like, what are you guys doing here? And after you do things, certain things might trigger the ghosts to turn harmful. That might be something that is based on a certain action. That doesn't necessarily have to be success or failure. That might be just a certain action that the players decided to do. That could be a trigger for the ghosts to act in a certain way. That could be a story element that's predetermined. And then there might be some actions that would calm them down again. So if the players start figuring out a little bit more, that might be something narrative where they learn a little bit more about the people those ghosts were in their life and do something good for them. Those ghosts might even protect them from someone who wants to harm them. If they do something that is against their nature, they might actually turn against the player. So that might be one of the things that we could say we take from Pac-Man. The ghosts start moving faster.
I like that they're moving faster, and I think the further you get, the faster they should move. The more you disturb things, it should get harder and harder. What if we did this? What if there's a priest like hanging outside of this haunted mansion and is like, listen, I want to purify this place, but like in order for me to do that with my powers, blah 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 blah, blah magic stuff, I need to know what happened here. If I try to do this without knowing what happened here,
that's a good idea.
I can't let these ghosts rest. I can't lay them to rest without knowing their fate. Magical Pearl. You go in here, you figure out what happened in this place. Insert mystery here, so you can come up with a mystery. I could think of, there could be one of them was a murder and he slowly killed the rest of them, or she. Could be they were all part of some cult that, they slowly became part of a cult and they sacrificed themselves to it. It could be whatever you want it to be, depending on what fits with the themes of your game. This would be a great way to drop lore in your game. If there's important rulers or important history, you could drop in this is the king and he was killed, or he killed these people because of whatever, when this was Mad King Leon and he slowly murdered everyone he knew as he got crazier and crazier. So there's a lot of things you could dump in there lore wise if you wanted. We don't have to come up with your adventure this way. You got to do that part on your own. Sorry, but the encounter stands. You have to go in here so that the priest can purify this place. And you have to figure out what happened. Why did all these people die? And once he knows that, he can purify this area. So that would be our goal. Figure out what happened here.
I like that.
I think choices with impact right away. We have, when do I use this little light orb? Stakes, I think, comes next. What happens if they fail? What does a partial failure look like? A whole failure? and a whole success.
Success means we figure out the mystery, we tell the priest gets the whole building to peace. Partial would be we figure out some part, maybe we accidentally disturb something or disturb something unknowingly, and the priest is not able to do the entire job. Might be able to bring peace to some of those lost souls, to some of those goals, but not to all of them because we angered them or something like that. And they are in a state that is beyond a simple ritual.
Mm-hmm.
Failure, we die and we become ghosts in the mansion.
Yeah, you are trapped there forever.
Or we just don't figure it out at all. And the priest has to, because I think maybe that's the priest's choice, right? Like, I can either put these souls to rest or I can banish the souls and destroy them for eternity. My God would like the first one. I can give you rewards for, helping me do the first one. But if you screw this up, then I have to do the second.
Well, I mean, there's always the fourth option of burning down the house.
I don't think that helps. I think that burning the house makes ghosts angrier.
Yeah, but the players always like to burn things.
It's true. Tension. We have the tension. These ghosts are wandering around following you. I really like the idea of, when you first go in, if you're sneaky, they're not really noticing you, or maybe they're curious, but as they see you disturbing things and figuring out what's going on, then they start to get more perturbed and come after you quicker and, more clearly. I think that's really cool. Mechanics, that's where we started. We've got the orb. We've got the ghosts chasing after you. We could do, like you said, we could either use the failure thing where when you fail, they go. I think clocks makes the most sense here. Like you were saying, like we have, and I might not even do the succeed or fail, you fill in one clock. I might just simply do every time you take an action, a clock is filled in.
Yeah. Yeah, because you want the constant tension of that chase.
And then that also allows for the dreaded, well, I want to retry this roll. Okay, you try it as many times as you want, guys. But each time you fail as a group or individually, that clock ticks down.
Or we build that Jenga tower and say, whenever you do something, you got to pull one of those blocks.
That would work too. I'd make the Jenga tower quite small because you want the ghosts to be up in their business, I think, regularly, right? They've got their little orb to be, they've got their little panic button. Modes. It's interesting because I think part of what we have to do is say that the ghosts here are untouchable in terms of you cannot.
It's not a brute force solution.
Yeah. It is combat because the ghosts can hurt you, but it is not combat because you can't really do anything to the ghosts.
Do we think we want to bring in social encounters by maybe if we find out something specific about one of the ghosts, we are able to communicate with that ghost that would align with a possible power-up that might be available just for a certain amount of time?
I think we could totally do that. I think we could also... We could say that when you hit the button, it makes them docile and you could talk to them as opposed to just run away. Or we could make a non-crazed ghost a specific location. One of the things is a ghost, sitting in a chair crying or whatever. Like they're not crazy and like elongated and teeth out like the others. They seem to be more... I think we could very easily add it in a few different ways. And you're right, I probably would. My gut feeling would be to go with somebody in a location just because I feel like them being able to talk to all of maybe it would raise the tension because they'd be like, who are you? Who are you? I also wouldn't want to come up with like 6 names. Mm-hmm. That would be too much work for me. But I think you could do either one or all of the above.
I like the location.
Yeah.
because it gives a little bit more structure.
Some combination.
Yeah, and then it will be a social, there will be a social encounter. Not it could become one, which I think is kind of cool sometimes, because you do have those players who really thrive on the social encounters, and so you want to make sure that they're there. And this feels like, I mean, I guess it could be in the middle of a town, but this feels like it's surrounded by either combat or exploration. Probably there's not a haunted house in the middle of town. That it could be, but I feel like this leans more towards, we're out in the wilderness.
A cabin in the woods or somewhere on a silent hill.
Good. I like it. All right, let's get into our box text section. As you make your way through the dark and decrepit woods, a mansion comes into view. You see a lone figure robed in black and white, waiting outside. He waves you over. I need some help here, and you look like the type who will do the kind of work I need help with. The mansion is haunted, and I've come here to cleanse it. Something bad happened here, and I need to know what it was. If I don't, I can't perform the proper ritual and banish the spirits needing exorcising and pardoning the innocent. This is where you come in. If you can get in there and figure out what happened, I can do this ritual. Now, it is dangerous. The ghosts in here can't be touched by any physical or magical means, and the more you root around in there, the more agitated they're going to get. You won't be able to fight them or kill them, but I do have a way to calm them down. This pearl is filled with divine light and should sedate them for a little while when you activate it. It's only got 4 charges in it, so don't go in there blasting this thing off every time you see a ghost. I will, of course, reward you if you can pull this off, and I'm sure the spirits pardoned will be eternally grateful. Pearl in hand, you open the large door and enter the mansion. Wreckage and remains of a once elegant home lie scattered along the floor. Then you see them, faint and transparent. Little human shapes floating through the house. They seem to pay very little mind until you bend over to grab a cup. Then you see a set of eyes on you. Thanks for listening to The Encounter Table. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to the podcast, leave us a 5-star rating and review on Apple or your favorite podcatcher, and share us with your friends. We love to hear from our listeners, so please comment on the podcast on our website at www.tabletop-rpg-encounters.com, find us on Twitter at TTRPG-Encounters, or on Facebook at the Tabletop RPG Encounters page. If you'd like to support the podcast in a monetary way, you can visit our Patreon at www.patreon.com/the_encounter_table. If you want to buy any of the games we discuss, use our affiliate links in the podcast description or the affiliate links on our websites. This helps us find cool stuff to review and talk about. The music accompanying our box text is Gilly Wash by Blue Dot Sessions. You can find their music at sessions.blue. You can find Ralf on Twitter at WooDaRPG, that's at WUDERPG, or buy some of his games at woodarpg.itch.io. Kade is a real person you can't find on the internet. And remember, keep playing,
keep designing,
and always check for traps.